Hello. So, we're going to make another Neville car video today. Um, for long-time viewers, I'm sorry. Just kidding. It's funny, people who have been into my content for a while, they don't really usually ask for Neville advice. Because I think they see, in the same way I see, that Neville is really not that different than a lot of the other teachers we often talk about. But for people who are newer to law of assumption, law of attraction concepts, they're clamoring to hear about Neville, and Neville's really hot. Uh, and don't worry, all you got to do is watch some of these car videos, uh, and it'll cool down. Your fervor over Neville will cool down, unless you're a dogmatist. And if you're a dogmatist, you'll just write some crazy comments on my channel, and eventually I'll get ticked off and tell you to buzz off, and that'll be the end of it. So, regardless, we'll all get to cool down, right? But Papa Bear Tim occasionally likes to make Neville videos in the car. And even if you're old here, there's value in what I think I'm about to share. Quick reminder, too, before I forget, that Marvin and I are retiring that. So as part of our SB coaching program, Marvin and I currently when we started, we offered this special $250 a month. You just join for the weekly group calls. You don't get any private one-on-one sessions with us. You just get the weekly group calls, which is insane for $250 a month. I mean, that could be $1,000 a month, and it would be a good deal if you especially if you attend live and take even a fraction of the advice that is shared in those sessions. But anyway, we knew that was way too cheap of a price. We wanted to initially offer it to people who were interested, who had financial constraints, but it's done. We're going to stop offering it in like the next day or two. So if you want to join at that very cheap price, if you can't afford anything more than $250 a month to month, there's no obligation to continue long term. Reach out to Marvin or me ASAP. Otherwise, the deal is gone forever, ever, 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 ever. All right, so Nev. Normal disclaimer. I love Neville Goddard. Love him. He's one of my favorite spiritual teachers, manifesting teachers for sure. Love the guy. However, I love him not because of the YouTube videos I hear people talking about him, but because of his wonderful style, his books, which are just fantastic, his numerous wonderful, eloquent lectures. Really a unique, cool, mystical dude. Love the guy. And he said he was a very grandiose teacher, a teacher who liked to make sweeping statements, who seemingly believed in a lot of sweeping statements, didn't just say him, actually believed it, for both good and bad. And because of his style, which is actually quite antiquated, he was very much in the, like, I don't know if it's like Victorian or post-Victorian era style of like speaking and like being very much a speaker and just very, again, dramatic, very much like enmeshed in that first part of the 20th century type of speaking style. Because of that grandiosity, when we hear his advice today in his lectures and read his books, it's very easy for that to be interpreted very dogmatically. And people forget that Neville was, in his heart, very much an artist, very much a mystical personality, not like a businessman or some self-improvement guru, but very much like a spiritual, mystical, artsy, poetic type. He was a professional dancer for a number of years, very into his body, into stuff that we would, refer to more as like yoga type practices. So that's where he's coming from, right? He's not like Dr. Joe. Had some good comments on the channel about Dr. Joe Dispenza, the chiropractor. He's not like Dr. Joe, guys. And he's not like Abraham Hicks, quite frankly. Neville wouldn't be taking cruises with everybody, talking about the vortex. That ain't Nev. Um, but yeah, he said a lot of stuff that's seemingly contradictory unless like you get his personality and you get his sensibility, in my opinion. And he contradicts himself like a lot of good artists and spiritual people do because he's trying to get at an underlying point, I think. Right? So it's very easy to forgive him for his quote unquote contradictions if you look at him not from this dumbass YouTube lens, but from a lens of him as a person. And, everybody said like Neville was he was very open. Like you could say, well, I disagree with you. And he would say, that's fine. He would say, well, that's your opinion. He would always say, test what I'm saying. Test. Not like this is true. You have to believe it. But, test it to see if it's true. Right? He was an open-minded guy. Very open-minded. So the last video, I'll put a link above to it. One thing that really muddles things up for people is Neville did say that, you can manifest something in 3 days. I'll read this quote again. This is from 5 Lessons, his great series of lectures he gave in LA in the late 40s. He says, the Bible gives it as 3 days. The duration is 3 days for a response in this world. If I would now assume I am what I want to be, and if I am faithful to it and walk as though I were, the very longest stretch given for its realization is 3 days. If there is something tonight that you really want in this world, then experience it in imagination, what you would experience in the flesh were you to realize your goal and deafen your ears and blind your eyes to all that denies the reality of your assumption. If you do this, you would be able to tell me before I leave the city of Los Angeles that you have realized what was only a wish when you came here. So there it is right there. Prime practical Nev, late 1940s Nev, which is basically my favorite Neville period of his lectures, saying, basically, if you can embody it fully, if you can faithfully walk as though it were, within 3 days you will manifest what you want. Talk about a grandiose statement. And there's a lot of amazing stories of this happening. But here's the thing. And again, there's so many nuances to this stuff, as Marvin and I always talk about. Harp on nuances. Neville's nuances is something I've titled stuff that before. Neville's full of nuances. Even though this can happen within 3 days, Neville is saying, and you can agree or disagree with this. Again, you can test it, as he says. A lot of our quote unquote big manifestations, romantic relationships, health improvements, job improvements, financial improvements, right? They will take longer than 3 days to manifest, guys. Obviously, to state the obvious, right? What Neville is saying is if you are able to be faithful and walk as though it were, it will happen within 3 days. But to be honest, for most of us, for these big things, we're not going to be able to be faithful. We're not. We're going to have to work on it to become more and more faithful. And then when we get to that point, it might manifest very quickly. And often it's like, we're having trouble. Then there's this insight like, I get it now. And when you get it now, that expectation, that belief is in place to actually make it manifest outwardly, to demonstrate outwardly very quickly in your life. But in the Neville YouTube, Reddit, insane toxic community, people interpret it, well, you're going to be able to manifest whatever you want within 3 days. And I say, great, that's possible, right? But then show me you're doing it. And then most people shut the F up because they can't fucking do it more than once or twice if they can do it at all. As we had the commenter say the other day, something I strongly agree with. If it was as easy as these morons, these dogmatists say on YouTube and Reddit, then we would be flying around and, just bopping people and healing whoever's sick and be in this, elevated celestial plane where everything is just quote unquote perfect. Can you actually be faithful and assume a state and walk as though that were? Basically, nobody can, including Neville. Basically, so many of these New Thought teachings, it's like you are aspiring to be Christ. So you should be like Jesus, right? So that's the state. Can you walk in that state, assume that state for 3 straight days and remain faithful to it? Here's Neville saying, talking about doing that. Later on in 5 Lessons, he says this, Let me now retell and emphasize an experience of mine printed by me 2 years ago under the title The Search, which was a short pamphlet he wrote. I think it will help you to understand this law of consciousness and show you that you have no one to change but self, for you are incapable of seeing other than the contents of your own consciousness. Once in an idle interval at sea, I meditated on, quote unquote, the perfect state, and wondered what I would be were I of too pure eyes to behold iniquity, if to me all things were pure, and were I without condemnation. As I became lost in this fiery brooding, I found myself lifted above the dark environment of the senses. So intense was feeling, I felt myself a being of fire dwelling in a body of air. Voices, as from a heavenly chorus, with the exaltation of those who had been conquerors in a conflict with death, were singing, "He is risen. He is risen." And intuitively I knew they meant me. Then I seemed to be walking in the night. I soon came upon a scene that might have been the ancient pool of Bethesda, for in this place lay a great multitude of impotent folk, blind, halt, withered, waiting not for the moving of the water as of tradition, but waiting for me. As I came near, without thought or effort on my part, they were, one after the other, molded as by the magician of the beautiful. Eyes, hands, feet, all missing members, were drawn from some invisible reservoir and molded in harmony with that perfection which I felt springing within me. When all were made perfect, the chorus exulted, "It is finished." I knew this vision was the result of my intense meditation upon the idea of perfection, for my meditations invariably bring about union with the state contemplated. I had been so completely absorbed within the idea that for a while I had become what I had contemplated, and the high purpose with which I had for that moment identified myself, and the high purpose with which I had for that moment identified myself, drew the companionship of high things and fashioned the vision in harmony with my inner nature. The idea with which we are united works by association of ideas to awaken 1,000 moods to create a drama in keeping with the central idea. My mystical experiences have convinced me that there is no way to bring about the perfection we seek other than by the transformation of ourselves. As soon as we succeed in transforming ourselves, the world will melt magically before our eyes and reshape itself in harmony with that which our transformation affirms. We fashion the world that surrounds us by the intensity of our imagination and feeling, and we illuminate or darken our lives by the concepts we hold of ourselves. Nothing is more important to us than our conception of ourselves, and especially is true of our concept of the deep, dimensionally greater one within us. So that's an experience in Neville's he describes there. But here's the thing. Neville had this perfect state, he realized. But did he actually become like Christ outwardly? Was he able to hold that state for 3 days? No, he had a vision, guys. He had a vision. That's all, quote unquote, he got was a vision. He didn't become this perfect, quote unquote, perfect person who then walked out of that vision and was able to heal the sick in the 3D, or do all these other miracles. No, he had a vision. And it confirmed for him, that the idea with which we are united works by association of ideas to awaken 1,000 moods to create a drama in keeping with the central idea. But he had a mystical vision. It was not really, if I now would assume I am what I want to be, and if I am faithful to it and walk as though it were, the longest stretch given for its realization is 3 days. The realization for him here was a vision. It wasn't him becoming like Jesus and doing all these miracles when he got off of that ship. Think about this, guys. This is a good fucking video. Ooh, this is why I still make Papa Bear Tim Carr videos about Neville. The community is full of bullshitters. It's fine to admit that you don't understand a lot of this stuff, and this stuff is phenomenal, and how the imagination works is incredible, and we just are trying in a way to work with it in a way that most people are unaware they can, that Neville was aware you could, that people like Emile Coué were aware that you could, like so many of these new thought teachers were aware that you could, work with the imagination in this more productive, healthy way. But It's insane to claim that you're going to be able to do these miraculous things, uh, and then not be able to do them. Just to write it on a message board or write YouTube comments. If you look at it like this, if you think it's that dogmatic and easy, actually, first of all, as they say, read Neville, read between the lines of what Neville is saying, and show me. Start performing miracles, or at the very least, make a half fucking decent YouTube channel talking about these things where you're not just parroting Neville's advice and, not actually getting the nuances of what he's saying. Because let me be frank, my YouTube channel tells you more about Neville and is a better Neville YouTube channel than any of your fucking channels. And it's just some Papa Bear in the car making weird Neville videos that are helpful. If you want to talk to me, if you'd like a free short consultation, or if you want to join Marv and I, our SP coaching program, contact me over at radicalcounselor.com.